It's 10:30 now, and Dan Smith joins us. Dan is the singer and songwriter for the band Bastille. He's long been a fan of classical music, and his ambition to perform on stage with Bastille and a symphony orchestra came to fruition before lockdown in Hamburg with the Baltic Sea Philharmonic Orchestra and their celebrated conductor, Christian Järvi. A documentary telling the story of the project, Bastille ReOrchestrated, is currently available on Amazon Prime Video, and Dan joins me now. Dan, welcome to Scala Radio. I wonder, how have you been coping through lockdown, and how has making and releasing, finessing this documentary helped keep you busy?
Yeah, I guess I've coped through lockdown. Like some, felt fortunate to not have to worry as much about work and having a roof over my head. Have sort of just completely lost myself in making music as much as possible. And on the flip side, trying to be useful locally and volunteering quite a lot with the extra free time I have from not being on tour. So yeah, I guess a weird mix of total selfishness in trying to create and then trying to offset that by being a bit more useful. But yeah, this documentary has been a real labour of love, in that the ReOrchestrated project for us was something that we felt really passionately about and felt really excited by, and that it was an amazing opportunity to bring together our love of classical music with our love of collaborating with classical musicians and gospel musicians and arrangers, and being able to somehow sneak through the back door into these amazing venues and halls and get to play on some wonderful stages. And I guess it was a strange time to make a film about it, but I guess given the time and the space of lockdown, we were able to kind of take advantage of that. And it's been pretty surreal, sort of forcing ourselves to have a look back at everything that we've done, not only in this project, but I guess across our careers over the last sort of 8 to 10 years. So, yeah.
And Bastille ReOrchestrated is interesting in that respect, because it wasn't something that happened overnight. And you make it very clear that it's a progression from what happened in Union Chapel in London, and then what happened at the Albert Hall, and finally what happens at this extraordinary concert, firstly in Hamburg and then at the Palladium. Was there a sense that you had to do it this way because you were driving Bastille to a place perhaps one or two of them were slightly a bit uncomfortable to go?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting with the film, and I guess you only get this with hindsight, and it was useful having two directors, one of whom knows us really well and one of whom doesn't at all, to be able to kind of step back from it and try and interrogate from a filmmaking perspective what it is that would be interesting for someone that doesn't really know or potentially care about our band. So to try and tell the kind of story of creativity. And I guess what that uncovered was our insecurities and a lot of the realities that come with being a musician, being in a band, it being your life and your job. And, particularly for certain members of the band, any insecurities they may have about musicianship were massively exacerbated by being on these amazing stages with these incredibly dedicated, classically trained musicians. So yeah, it did throw up a bunch of things. The project was something that I felt really strongly about and just was so excited by and enthused by, but it's not something that many bands or artists really do to the extent that we have, because it's difficult and it's expensive, and it was purely something that we did just for the creative endeavor and for the love of the thrill of being able to be part of that thing. And a lot of the people that we work with, particularly our kind of managers at the time and agents and record labels, were supportive, but very much raising their eyebrows as to why we want to be doing this. But yeah, it's coming from the world of writing pop music and being in a band. It's a lot of time in a studio, on a laptop, in rehearsal rooms. There's rarely more than 5 of us in a room. So being able to have the opportunity to, I guess, realize the kind of vision of what we've been trying to do for such a long time with actual people rather than with just studio layering or production was really amazing for us.
And what is as exciting as watching all the footage from the various concerts with these extraordinary classical musicians is the one-to-one chats that the filmmakers have done with each of you in the band, where you have talked about that feeling of being scared, about being an imposter, about not actually being worthy of the place that you have found yourself in. What is it about the psyche of musicians? Because you do hear this quite a lot, that you might have been an overweight or a bullied child, somebody who was used to hiding away, making themselves invisible, suddenly wanting to stand on a stage in front of thousands and thousands of people, almost like, I don't know, somebody scared of flying wanting to be a pilot. What is that about?
Yeah, I can't explain it. And, for me, I guess it's kind of trying to not be too reductive at looking what involves being in a band. For me, my experience is one where I kind of write the songs and work in the studio producing the music all the time, as well as loving all the creative elements that come with it, be they performances, in various guises or in various places, the music videos, any way of like creating a world around the music. That's the stuff that gets me up in the morning, and you know, making songs and writing songs, be they for us or other people. That's what I love, the sort of the creative process of taking nothing and turning it into something that then exists. For me, right from the start, having to perform, and I say having to, which sounds ridiculous because obviously it's a lot of people's dream, but for me, being on stage just generally hasn't been somewhere that I felt hugely comfortable. And that's not to say I don't feel incredibly privileged, you know, for having the opportunities that we've had. And that's also not to say that loads of these shows haven't been amazing, but there are people who I think are in bands or in orchestras because they love the process of collaborating in public, being on stage, feeding off the crowd. I'd be entirely numb to say that, you know, I don't get a huge amount of like satisfaction from that. And it is obviously wonderful seeing songs that I've worked on or written in my bedroom on a laptop, you know, sung by thousands of people. It's indescribable, but I'm not someone who is driven by the desire to do that. I guess it probably seems from the outside a very odd thing to get into. And, you know, as I get older, I think more and more about maybe my place then is as a songwriter, you know, or a producer or whatever. But we have this incredibly fortunate position that not many people are able to play on the stages that we've been able to play on and do all the things we have. So I guess for me, I'm driven more by, now that, you know, we've achieved certain things, what is it we can do that kind of innovates or at least challenges us and our audiences within the format of a band. You know, any of the things we're fortunate enough to kind of do in and around the music we make.
Dan Smith is on the show today talking about Bastille ReOrchestrated, this feature-length documentary film starring the band. It's available at the moment on Amazon Prime Video. Tell you what, Dan, can you hang around? We'll play something from the ReOrchestrated album and then come back and chat. We're hearing from Dan Smith from the band Bastille. Dan's my guest today, talking about the documentary Bastille ReOrchestrated. Dan, although this project, which involved working with some amazing classical musicians, was a bit scary from some of the band, and you can see that in their faces in the documentary, for you it was a bit of a rollback to childhood because you had studied classical music with piano lessons and violin lessons and the like.
I had up to a very limited capacity. Let's just say I wasn't a child prodigy by any stretch of the imagination. But I guess that was kind of stitched into the musical language that I kind of knew as a kid to a certain point. But I was really obsessed with, I guess, film soundtracks growing up and the use of music in film. And that's where my love of music really came from. So many of the bands and artists and composers that I have come to know and love, I came to via film and via soundtracks.
Do you remember which of the films or the composers were that had that influence when you were very young?
I mean, I say very young. This is not a kid's film, but I remember like Barber's Adagio for Strings, just really, as I'm sure with, you know, with a huge amount of people, just really kind of grabbed me. It's so kind of beautiful and haunting. And that was probably an instance where I really sought it out. And we actually did a version of it. We did a kind of a vocal a cappella version on one of our mixtapes of that song. Because in the mixtapes we made, I guess it was me trying to bring together my love of film and my love of soundtracks and my love of scores with pop music. And that was maybe the first time we melded all these different worlds together and potentially took some pretty liberal liberties with with music. But yeah, I mean, there's another point where we sampled the Kronos Quartet from Requiem for a Dream, playing one of Clint Mansell's compositions for that film. That again really leapt out at me. But then also, I love Stanley Kubrick, and obviously throughout his films, he really amazingly and effectively uses classical music in so many different ways. I remember seeing Clockwork Orange and hearing all these kind of synth versions of Beethoven, and they really leap out. But again, 2001: Space Odyssey, he's a director who I always loved growing up and was really fascinated by his use of music. And I guess the repurposing of classics has always been kind of interesting with him.
Dan, then, it was such an extraordinary thing to watch. And what's apparent at the end of the documentary is how much hunger there is within the band to do it again. So could we ever have a reorchestrated tour?
Yeah, that was very, what the documentary doesn't show, and I guess what comes from trying to condense a project that's 3 or 4 years long and a band that have been around for nearly a decade down into an hour-long film, is we did do a tour. Like a part of the kind of road to Royal Albert Hall was a tour that we did around the UK and in a couple of European countries as well. a much more scaled down version. But that kind of really allowed us to go to loads of different concert halls of varying sizes across the country and across Europe, which was brilliant. But obviously, something about this and something about the scale of an orchestra makes you just want to do it bigger and better each time. And Johnny, like he says in the film, every time we've done one, he wants to go back and rescore everything and justify its purpose and write these versions for the different concert halls. But I think what working with the Baltic Sea Philharmonic showed us was it takes a lot of work, but being able to kind of plug into local orchestras is something that we would love to do. Obviously, we'd love to do a tour, and we'd love to be able to do a couple of nights with different orchestras from within the countries that they're from. And that's definitely something that we will aim and strive for. I mean, there's the small matter of the pandemic, which has shut down the entire world, not to mention the entire music industry, not to mention the entire, live touring world. But being optimistic on the other side of this, it would be a wonderful way to kind of go back to it. And for me personally, I've enjoyed these shows more than I've ever enjoyed playing shows. There's something about being able to sort of slip into the background a bit and enjoy being part of the brilliance of everybody else's musicianship. And, using our band and our music as a kind of a bit of a canvas on which other people can kind of project what they're amazing at. That's been a real joy for me. And I hope we get to do more of it.
Well, I can see we've been having this chat and you're sitting in a home studio by the looks of it, and I can see the soundproofing on the wall and a keyboard and some neon signs. Is that where you are?
We actually have a studio in South London. Yeah, so I've been very lucky when it's been legal, being able to, cycle to the studio and not be in the usual four walls for a few hours a day. But yeah, it's been a real haven being able to make music. I feel very, very lucky in that respect. And, and like talking about friends of ours who are session musicians or classical musicians and have had, their lives, their livelihoods and their passion kind of ripped out from underneath their feet. I couldn't feel luckier and more aware of how lucky I am to be able to still make music in a way that is authentic to us. So yeah.
What's the volunteering been? What have you been up to?
So I guess when lockdown happened a year ago, we were just looking around locally, as well as volunteering for the NHS and, doing shopping for people locally. I started working 2 or 3 days a week at 2 food banks locally. So at one, packing food parcels for people, for families of different sizes. And then at the other one, taking people's kind of weekly shop on my bike and round to sort of people locally, which was amazing. In, being able to get to know my area of where I live a bit better, and, all the blocks of flats that you maybe walk past every day but don't really properly think about who lives there, getting to know a lot of people, and it's very, very humbling. And then more recently, I've been a friend of mine who's a GP. Her surgery has been in need of people to don luminous yellow tabards and help direct people coming for their vaccines towards. So I've been like manning a clipboard and a luminous yellow vest, feeling very official, and ticking names off and directing people towards their vaccines. So it's been good. But yeah, I mean, I must stress that that's coupled with also being able to record music and do the things that we do. So I feel like it's the very, very least that I could do.
Excellent. I never got told off because you'd substituted the wrong thing in the groceries and you'd given them something they didn't really want.
Oh mate, yeah, 100%. I have a newfound, as I think we all do, a newfound respect for anyone who's in charge of someone else's shopping or delivery drivers or anything like that, of what they have to put up with every day.
We're going to close down, I think, with a piece of soundtrack music, seeing as that was such a huge influence on you in the earlier part of your musical journey. And it's Max Richter that you've chosen. Why Max?
He's just obviously kind of in some places totally ubiquitous in terms of his reach. The Sleep Project is brilliant and fascinating and beautiful, and he's done so much brilliant work across film and TV, and has such a distinct sound as well, which I think is similar to someone like Philip Glass. It's brilliant with a kind of modern composer when you can identify their sound almost immediately. And I think I was mainly aware of him in a kind of mainstream way in a TV show called The Leftovers, which is also brilliant. It's beautiful, kind of simple piano-based track called The Departure.
Dan Smith, been great to talk to you. Many thanks.
Thanks so much. Cheers.